Halloween.
I think he'll come back.
Halloween, the night he came home. Rated R.
Welcome to the Film Scholar. Today, anyone who enjoyed my rankings of the movies in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise gets a treat because I'm going to rank a much better series. Well, that's not saying much. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre series is pretty awful outside the masterpiece that is the original. The original Halloween is just as much of a masterpiece, but let's talk about how it compares to all the sequels, remakes, and reboots. Bringing up the rear at number 13 is the atrocious 1995 movie, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. It starts off with Michael having kidnapped his niece Jamie and something about an incest baby. Ew. And some sort of devil-worshipping cult or something. And Paul Rudd, as one of many actors in this franchise who has played Tommy Doyle, begins his illustrious film career with a real stinker. Number 12. After the film we just discussed, the franchise appeared deader than Judith Myers before the subsequent reboot, but was already on its seemingly last legs with the preceding movie, easily the second worst in the whole franchise. 1989's Halloween 5, Revenge of Michael Myers. Michael pursues his niece Jamie and they were already really milking the concept at this point. Nothing memorable happens. Just a bunch of chasing and stabbing directed by someone who doesn't have a shred of John Carpenter's talent. Now, as we've advanced past the completely worthless garbage to garbage with a tiny amount of redeeming quality, a teeny tiny amount anyway, let's move forward. Number 11. 1982's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, is infamous for being the only film in the franchise, well, famous or infamous, for being the only film in the franchise not to feature Michael Myers. It's a completely self-contained story and came to be because John Carpenter, after wisely feeling that Myers' story was finished with the previous film, wanted to make the franchise into an anthology. The idea was nixed because this film bombed. But should that have happened? It's not awful per se. The production values are decent, unlike those of the worst two movies on this list, which look very amateurish. Plus, it has a creepy earworm.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween.
I bet you never thought the London Bridge tune could give you chills. Saying it's not awful is about the nicest thing I can say about it, though. Although the story had potential, pretty much everything in this film, the dialogue, the acting, the direction, which was done by an associate of John Carpenter's, not the man himself, was forgettable. It's appropriate this movie was non-canon because it contributed as much to film history as it did to its own franchise. Nothing. Now we get a little better with number 10. 2002's Halloween Resurrection was okay, only a tiny bit better. The movie is a direct sequel to the film that the franchise seemingly But once they made a profit off of the preceding movie, of course, Miramax couldn't resist going back to the well. Halloween Resurrection starts off with a dumb revelation about how Michael's not really dead, followed by an overly stylized scene where Michael kills Laurie, and then the main plot about a group of young people having a party in a house terrorized by Michael. The premise isn't bad. In fact, seems like a sort of thing you'd almost feel like the setting was a sort of reality show you'd often see on MTV when my business manager and I were in the MTV demographic. But you know what? The whole film is actually directed like a music video. That may be appropriate since one of the stars, Busta Rhymes, was a huge rapper at the time, but the constant loudness and frenetic editing dissipate any tension. Honestly, the only reason I'm ranking this 10th instead of 11th is that a cute young lady shows her tits instead of an ugly middle-aged man showing his ass like in Season of the Witch. Number 9. The movie right before Halloween Resurrection was a big deal. Not only was it supposed to end the franchise, like I said, but Halloween H2O 20 years later was Jamie Lee Curtis's first appearance in a Halloween movie in over a decade and a half. They retconned out Laurie Strode's death and the daughter they gave her, the Michael's niece, Jamie. Instead, Laurie now had a son played by Josh Hartnett in his film debut. That was the beginning for a future megastar. Not. That's what he gets for turning down the lead role in the Dark Knight trilogy. Back to Halloween H2O, however. It was interesting seeing Laurie back and finding out what became of her life in this timeline. Her romance with the character played by Adam Arkin is compelling enough. If the name Adam Arkin sounds familiar, he's the son of screen legend Alan Arkin. He's also the person who might have had look-alike George Clooney's career if, in 1994, Arkin had been cast on the medical TV drama series ER and Clooney on the medical TV series Chicago Hope, instead of the other way around. Wow, I'm rubbing in all salt in all the has-been actors' wounds today. Well, someone in the movie who did go on to even bigger acting stardom, thanks to NCIS, is LL Cool J, or Double L Cool J, as Pat Sajak once called him on Celebrity Wheel of Fortune. He plays a security guard at the prep school where Laurie and her boyfriend work, and her son John is a student. Curtis, Arkin, Cool J, Hartnett, and the other actors playing teens all do a good job, and the premise is promising enough. John and some of his friends want to party in secret by themselves when the rest of the school is out on a multi-day trip, but Uncle Michael is on the prowl. The movie falls flat, though. Too many jump scares, too loud, too fast-paced. Honestly, we may have had Jamie Lee Curtis back, but we did not have back John Carpenter or his co-creator of the franchise, Deborah Hill. Instead, we had filmmakers who apparently only knew how to create completely routine slasher films. Mediocre entries in the genre that Halloween, the original, brilliantly invented. It's not just the direction, though. The script doesn't really give us a sense of Laurie's trauma from what happened long ago and her attempts to move forward with her life, nor any tormented feelings John has about being the boogeyman's nephew. Those types of ideas were explored in some form or other by pretty much every better film on this list. Speaking of which, number 8, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009. I was actually a fan of Zombie's first take on the classic franchise. but not this one. We saw Michael without his mask repeatedly, which I realized also happened in the original, but it was supposed to be a sudden and dramatic revelation there. Here it's treated as somewhat routine and ruins the character's mystique. Furthermore, there's some occult stuff running rampant, and that's out of place in a Halloween movie. Yes, I know I mentioned Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers has some, but let's pretend that movie never happened. I will say that in defense of this movie, it brought satisfactory resolution to Michael and Laurie's arc from Zombie's first Halloween. At least the director's cut does, and that's the version I recommend, as it has more hot girl nudity. Number 7 is the most recent entry, 2002's Halloween Ends. It does bring a competent ending to the whole series. I'll give it that. Some might argue that in our world of endless remakes, reboots, and sequels, there's no way it's actually over. But we seem to have really witnessed the last of Halloween's one-time rival series, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. My big issue is leading up to the ending. Far too much focus is on a completely new character named Corey. A film finishing the whole series and following a previous entry that ended on a huge cliffhanger is not the place to give a Halloween movie a new lead character, especially considering Corey is arguably both the protagonist and the antagonist. In the process, Laurie and her granddaughter get kind of pushed aside, despite the compelling trauma they're dealing with, and Michael himself seems kind of impotent. Why would he feel the need to hide out underground from the townspeople when he completely got the best of them last time? Also, attempts to provide sociological commentary on how a town that's been through trauma feels the need to make monsters out of Laurie and Corey are utterly sophomoric. There are few things more annoying than people thinking they're profound when they're not. As far as the ending, notice I simply called it competent. We finally see Michael dead, but considering he practically only has a cameo in the movie, my reaction was kind of, so? Also, this is one case where they actually should have shown his face, yet they somehow tried to hold on to his mystique. In a movie where we see him slaughtered to death, he barely appeared, and he seemed kind of weak and timid anyway. Plus, Laurie's calmly writing a book about the whole thing that she wraps up at the end almost makes her 4-decade ordeal with Michael seem like an eat, pray, love experience instead of the life-changing trauma it was compellingly depicted as in the 2 installments this movie followed. Honestly, the best thing about this movie was the misleading trailer, which made it seem like a very fitting conclusion to this latest trilogy. Although, cover your eyes and ears if you haven't already seen the other 2 installments.
He killed my daughter, but tonight I will kill him.
Number 6 is Halloween 4, Return of Michael Myers. Notice that, until now, I criticized every movie in the series, sometimes viciously, and always deservedly. Halloween 4 honestly surprised me in how much it didn't suck. It kept my interest the whole time, despite how discerning I tend to be. We find out about Laurie's death and meet her grieving little girl, appropriately named Jamie, like I mentioned. She's played by Danielle Harris. As Jamie tries to adjust to life with her new adopted parents, we haven't seen the last of her uncle. And we shouldn't forget that Jamie herself has that Myers blood running through her. The movie is solid with sympathetic characters and a fair share of tension. I buy a frequent fear pass and go to Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights many times every year, And it's fitting that one year they had a whole maze devoted specifically to Halloween 4. Of course, another year they also had one devoted to Halloween 5. On the bright side, they've had countless mazes devoted to the series overall. Halloween 4 was, oddly enough, the very first Halloween movie I ever watched. One summer when I visited my grandparents' house and a bunch of us cousins were there, my sister, by far the oldest, suggested we watch Halloween, which she had seen before. The store only had Halloween 4, though, and a bunch of my cousins were laughing in the days following us watching it, going, ah, poo, ah, poo, ah, poo. Rewatching this movie for the vlog, I saw that only happened once, and honestly, I didn't find it dumb at all. I'm sorry about earlier, Halloween 4. Now we finally reached the top 5. Number 5 is the 2018 Halloween reboot. Other people, understandably, get confused between a remake and a reboot. Heck, in my last job at Warner Brothers, one of my team's responsibilities was to tag titles with appropriate labels, and even we had to debate what the difference is between the two things. Allow me my 2 cents. A remake tells a story one specific movie tells. There may be changes, sometimes significant changes, but there is that one-to-one relationship. A reboot undoes part of a franchise, starting a fresh continuity. Thus, I consider the 2007 movie called Halloween a remake, even though it had the sequel I mentioned, whereas the 2018 movie called Halloween is a reboot, as it serves as a sequel to that 1978 movie called Halloween while erasing what came after. I know it's complicated, and I myself didn't really know anything prior to 2018 when I read a crack.com article sorting through the tangled web. Just in time, because with the release of the 2018 Halloween, I was finally going to watch a movie in the series outside the 1978 Halloween, which I'd seen countless times, and Halloween 4, which I mentioned randomly at that one family gathering. The way it worked was as follows. There was, of course, the original 1978 Halloween. Then came 1981's Halloween 2, which continued the story while adding the twist that Laurie is Michael's sister. Then 1982's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, a completely self-contained story having nothing to do with Michael Myers. Then Halloween 4, that killed off Laurie but gave her the little girl Jamie, played by Danielle Harris. Jamie was the main character of the 5th and 6th movies, but then H2O was a reboot, retconning out Laurie's death and instead giving her the son John. And Resurrection was a direct sequel to H2O. Then came the 2 Rob Zombie movies that were completely their own thing. Finally came the 2018 Halloween, the start of a new and seemingly final trilogy. This movie left Laurie's first death retconned out, also retconned out her second death, left her daughter Jamie retconned out, also retconned out her son John, and even retconned out Laurie being Michael's sister. Thus, it was a direct sequel to the 1978 Halloween. Although both of her previous children failed to exist in this continuity, Laurie does now have a daughter named Karen, appearing in a movie right before that name was driven to extinction. The character was born long before that, though. Interesting bit of trivia. Despite existing in different universes and being shown at different times, all 3 of Laurie's children were born in 1981, year the best people ever were born. Right, business manager? That's why Jamie was a little girl who grew into a teen, John was almost a legal adult, and Karen was an old enough adult to have a teen daughter. The 2018 movie starts off with 2 reporters trying to speak to Michael in a mental institution where he's been isolated for the past 40 years. Creepily, we see that he chooses to stand in a rectangle drawn on the ground where everyone else knows not to approach him. We also get told by a doctor at the hospital that he understands what people say, but deliberately won't talk. Plus, we kind of see part of his face, but not really. It's a chilling opening preceding the credits. I basically thought the uncanny valley isn't just for androids, but for boogeymen. The rest of the movie focuses on Karen, her husband, that daughter Allison, and Allison's boyfriend. And oh yeah, Laurie Strode. Very different and much more compelling than her alternate self in Halloween H2O. This continuity's Laurie has basically spent the past 40 years as a crazed hermit, plotting her revenge for when Michael returns. You guessed it, Michael escapes. The reporters play a big part during the movie's first act, but after that, it's all about Laurie and her family versus Michael. Nothing we haven't seen done better in the original, but it's still great. And both this list and the ending of this movie lead in the next film that followed. Number 4, 2021's Halloween Kills. What a beginning. It's set during the events of the first movie and captures the look of it perfectly. We see more how that night's events affected Laurie's babysitting charge, Tommy Doyle, as well as others involved in the flashback. Then we see how survivors continue to draw on each other for strength in the present day. By present day, I mean that specific present day, as it's said on Halloween Day 2018. When it turns out Michael is on the loose again, these survivors decide it's time to end him once and for all. And we actually see a very scary indictment of mob mentality and becoming what you hate. Halloween Kills almost feels like an action horror movie, and while escalating violence usually does not correlate with escalating tension, which is caused by waiting for violence that hasn't happened, this is an exception. It all leads to a devastating final sequence, with a final shot that will make your heart fall out of your chest. No gory pun intended. It seems like we were all in for the most magnificent final installment ever. And the trailer for Halloween Ends promised us exactly what we expected, with Laurie utterly consumed by a desire for vengeance. Instead, we got introduced to a completely new character, and it turned into the Corey show. I already vented about Halloween Ends and that dumbass Corey, though. Now let's move on to films even better than Halloween Kills. Number 3 is Halloween 2, the 1981 movie, of course. I already made clear I didn't care for Rob Zombie's movie by that name. Although Zombie's first movie was a remake of the very first Halloween, a loose remake, but a remake nonetheless, his Halloween 2 bore no resemblance whatsoever to that film. Actually, more than I liken this Halloween to the other Halloween 2, I liken it to Rocky 2. The original Halloween, like the original Rocky, told a story that worked perfectly on its own and seemingly ended just right. Once it was a huge hit, the studio couldn't resist a sequel, and another and another. But before the subsequent sequels came out and turned the series into garbage, the initial sequel more than justified its existence by starting immediately after the first film and taking the characters the next logical, very compelling direction as they deal with the injuries they just suffered. I tend to love stories set in one location, especially horror movies, as the claustrophobia adds another level of tension to the existing scares. In the film, Laurie is taken to the hospital following her trauma at Michael's hands in the original. And of course, Michael is still prowling around, so Laurie and Dr. Loomis better watch out as he pursues them through the hospital.
Laurie! Laurie!
Like Rocky 2, my favorite of that series, this is highly underrated. Seek it out, pay for it if you need to, as the fact that's neither popular enough to justify paying the high licensing costs the original gets, nor loathed enough to get a license for the pennies the fifth and sixth installments get, means Halloween 2 is hard to find on streaming services. Yet it's worth it. Well done. We made it all the way to runner-up. Number 2 is Halloween. Which one, you ask? Not the most recent one, which we've already discussed, but the middle one, the 2007 version, directed by Sherry Moon Zombie's husband. This remake tells basically the same story as the original. Michael Myers is a child who commits murder, gets institutionalized, breaks on Halloween night decades later, and pursues his biological little sister, Laurie Strode. However, there are also significant differences that more than justify this movie's existence. And I'm not talking about the more graphic nudity or the gore that Rob Zombie added. No, the story had dramatic differences. Michael is not a 6-year-old in the beginning. He's a preteen who resorts to violence to deal with bullies and his abusive stepfather, but who is on the surface a normal, if downtrodden kid. Notably, he really loves his infant sister, and we know from the beginning that's what Laurie is. Thus, when Michael gets sent to mental hospital after his committing homicide, it's truly heartbreaking watching him protectively hold on the picture he took of himself with baby Laurie, grow increasingly catatonic as he stops speaking, and ultimately just snap. Why? Who knows? Yes, this very markedly different take on Michael's origin is painful to see, as he was a kid born with a good heart, but to put it in Freudian terms, no ego to mediate between the superego and the id. Even when he breaks out of the hospital, his violent acts are done with the goal of reuniting with his beloved Laurie, despite being unable to speak and tell her that, or even tell her who he is. The movie is helped by great performances from actors who all return for Zombie sequel. 7-foot former wrestler Tyler Mane as adult Michael, Scout Taylor Compton as teenage Laurie, Malcolm McDowell as Dr. Loomis, Brad Dourif as Sheriff Brackett, and Danielle Harris as his daughter, Annie Brackett. Yes, that Danielle Harris. It was an inspired casting choice, giving the child who had played Laurie's daughter in previous sequels to the original movie the part in the remake of Laurie's friend from the original movie. This was made possible by the fact that Danielle Harris was pushing 30, yet could still pass for a teenager. Unlike her on-screen mom in her previous appearances. Well, I say on-screen mom, but they were never in the same movie. Okay, this is confusing, but hang in there. Point is, Jamie Lee Curtis in the first movie was practically still a teenager, but could have passed for over 30. Multiple people I've watched the original with, and I myself, wondered if Laurie was actually the wife of the character who was her father. Leaving that aside, though, that brings us to our number one movie. Was there any doubt? The original Halloween from 1978. Some people call Psycho the granddaddy of modern horror. In a list of the 25 scariest movies ever made many years ago, Entertainment Weekly talked about Psycho references in Halloween, both subtle, Janet Leigh's daughter being the heroine, and overt, the doctor in the movie being named Sam Loomis after her boyfriend in Psycho. The magazine quoted John Carpenter as saying the reason for the homages was everyone loves Psycho. The author of the article added, and Halloween. And Halloween was actually ranked higher. Meanwhile, in my last video for this channel, I ranked the whole Texas Chainsaw Massacre series the way I'm ranking the whole Halloween series now. And I meant it when I said there wouldn't have been a Halloween without the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Which of these movies is scariest, though? I will say the scariest movie ever made by a mile is the Dutch film, The Vanishing. However, I've often said that that's the bad kind of fear. You get it if you're home alone at night and someone jumps out at you with a knife. As far as the good kind of fear, the kind you get when you go to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios, the three movies tied for best providing it are the original installments of Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Halloween. A lot of people are surprised to learn that the original Halloween, like the original The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is mostly bloodless. If you're expecting a gore fest, watch a Saw movie or any of the other torture porn films from the early 21st century. And the number one movie on this list, the focus is on the tension. What a beginning. One of the best prologues in film history. We see, in 1963, teenage Judith Myers and her boyfriend stabbed to death by someone wearing a mask on Halloween night. Then the killer, whose first-person perspective we've been watching, walks outside, where the Myers parents are stunned to find out the murderer is their son, Michael, aged 6. Then comes the iconic theme music, playing as we look at scary jack-o'-lantern against a black backdrop. Following that, we jump ahead to 1978, the year the movie came out. As a 17-year-old, Laurie Strode and her friends are prepping for a low-key Halloween of babysitting and hooking up. In the case of the friends, this Halloween will be anything but chill, though. Although will be plenty chilling. Michael Myers has escaped from the mental hospital, and he's coming back to their town of Haddonfield, Illinois, still bloodthirsty. Everything about this movie, from the cinematography that has the perfect shade of dark at every moment, to the utterly haunting performance of the late Donald Pleasance as Michael's psychiatrist, Dr. Sam Loomis, to the way John Carpenter's direction makes the Shape, as he's called in the credits, such a terrifying, unstoppable force, to that legendary score, is perfect. For such a low budget, we got an utterly monumental achievement in the world of horror. Up until 1978, horror movies were pretty much always focused around supernatural monsters or were psychological and character-driven. Halloween basically gave birth to a whole new subgenre of horror, the slasher film. Although often imitated, never duplicated, is a cliche, it's very true here. No other film has ever done slasher better than the original Halloween. Not even its own sequels or its own remakes, reboots, reimaginings, whatever you want to call them. Horror fanatics like myself will forever be grateful for this movie. You like this video? Hit the subscribe button below. You like Halloween? Not just the whole movie, but the whole season and anything pertaining to it? Stay tuned for my next series of videos ranking all 100 Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segments.